on Sunday. Props and ops. Sitting pretty on a Monday. Props and ops. You know it's betting and beer with props and ops and props and ops.
NFL Week 5 is here, and so are we to break down the biggest line moves across the sharpest books that take the biggest bets. I'm your host, Matt Landis, joined by Fabian Summer, aka Suma, alongside our producer, Jacob. And Suma, we're now 4 weeks into the season. That used to be the quarter poll, but now with 17 games, not quite that nice round milestone. At the same time, we're a month in, and I'd love to know from your standpoint as a pro bettor, what are some of your biggest takeaways so far this season when it comes to market movement between us recording this show on Wednesdays and the games kicking off on Sundays?
Yeah, so I think in general, we have seen like teams like the Eagles and Jacksonville Jaguars, they consistently draw money or have drawn money. We also had some general action on the Lions early on, and on the overs for the Lions until last week against the Seahawks. That game, I think it opened 50, then got bet down to 48 before some over money came back, and then that game was flying into the 90s, which was pretty crazy. Overall, it's been a very wild season for totals, and it's interesting to see how the market handles totals, because we have like record lows in terms of average total scores for each game and average median scores for the NFL per week and stuff. We had some kind of a bounce back last week with, I think, averaging 50 points per single NFL matchup, also in part because of the Lions Seahawks game. But NFL offenses had some red zone struggles, especially inside the 10-yard line, which had a very big impact on scoring. Passing efficiencies down a little bit. The run game is not really that much improved in terms of efficiency, but it's consistent and it's getting closer towards pass efficiency. So yeah, probably something that defenses are doing different, but also I think offensive line play has not been very good so far this season. And yeah, you see that within the totals, we had very high totals when the season started, because the prior, from a market point of view, was still very high, like in the, 47-ish range, as an average basic anchor for NFL totals. And then we had these first 3 weeks with so many low game scores, and then the market quietly slightly adjusted, and then we had that spike week last week, and now it's very fascinating to see how the market will counter the, let's say, weekly changes in NFL scoring.
Yeah, I got to think it's a matter of time until the crazy percentage of games coming into under starts to regress toward the mean. We are seeing some fairly low totals across the board this week. But Suma, I want to get to a side right now, because I just saw my odds screen light up from left to right on a game featuring the Chargers and the Browns. I was going to ask you about this one, sticking on that -3 for the Chargers as long as it had. The +3s for Cleveland started to get expensive in recent hours, but now as we record this, early afternoon Pacific time for me on Wednesday, this one's down to pretty much a flat 2.5 across the board. Chris and Bookmaker down to Chargers -2. So somebody just pounded the Browns. And on one hand, I'm a bit relieved because I did get my +3 ticket in, and I was wondering what I was missing. I guess knowing that this line might be correct now with the Chargers as a shorter favorite, what do you think was behind this move on Cleveland down to +2? And what do you think took so long for it to last a few days at that firm 3?
I'm just checking my mobile right now, and it looks like Keenan Allen will not practice today. He's day to day. Myles Garrett was back in practice today. Jadeveon Clowney was not. And if you asked me this morning, I would have responded that Myles Garrett, Jadeveon Clowney, and Keenan Allen, all these 3 guys, will decide where the market is going to move, because all 3 guys are like in the 50-50 range in terms of whether they're going to be available this week, and all 3 have some market impact. Myles Garrett probably the highest impact, then Keenan Allen, then Jadeveon Clowney. And we saw last week that the Falcons were completely dominating the Browns at the line of scrimmage. Like they were able to move the ball at will in the second half. There was no pushback from the Browns defensive line. So you really want to have at least Myles Garrett back this week against the Chargers. And on the other side, this Chargers passing attack is really, really slow and is highly dependable on sharp route runners right now. And that's where you also want Keenan Allen back for them. So these are the three injuries. And with the market coming down to 2.5, it could be some guys just simply grabbing all the remaining +3, -120s with the Browns. Or there's also some more information leaking regarding the availability of Myles Garrett and potentially Keenan Allen.
Sounds good. Well, one of the benefits of doing this show when we do on Wednesdays, we're starting to get the first legitimate injury reports of the week, so we can factor in some market activity to the content of Between the Lines. And I'll just note that if anybody was debating betting Cleveland +3 and that ship has now sailed, the Browns in the +2, +2.5 range could be one of the more appealing teaser candidates of the week. So maybe I'll revisit that with Hitman when we record the Props and Hops flagship episode this Friday. But Suma, sticking to the regular programming here on Between the Lines, back to not quite the top of the board, but near it. The top game on the board that has seen some interesting movement throughout the course of the week, the Seahawks at the Saints. When we look at the side, this one opened New Orleans -5.5, ticked up to 6, has since ticked back down to the original 5.5. And it seems like there's a bit of a push-pull effect taking place in the market right now. When you look at this game, what do you make of the Saints perhaps getting a bit healthier? And what do you make of Geno Smith for the Seahawks maybe actually being good at quarterback in 2022?
Yeah, I think this is what it comes down to from a market perspective, in my opinion. It's very hard to really grasp what the Saints are right now. We don't know whether it's going to be Jameis Winston or whether it's going to be Andy Dalton. Is Michael Thomas back? We don't know. Is Jarvis Landry at 100%? Are they potentially getting one or two offensive linemen back, like Andrew Speed, for instance? So it's really some uncertainty with the Saints. And with the Seahawks, you mentioned it, their offense is looking pretty good. And I would say it's a question of whether they are going to run out of gas soon, or whether there's really some signal of the Seahawks offense playing above expectation, and whether that's consistent or not. I think the initial move to 6 that got bet down tells me right now that there is market resistance at the 6. So some bettors are willing to take the Seahawks at 6 blindly. The Seahawks also have no really injury impact this week. They might get 1 or 2 players back on defense, but I don't think it really matters because their defense is completely atrocious. So we are really just looking at some injuries for the Saints. But even with potentially Michael Thomas coming back, I don't know whether he's going to be 100% if he comes back, or whether it's Jameis Winston. I'm really having a hard time seeing this number getting past the 6. So if we get good news on some Saints players, I can see some people betting the Saints, because going into week 1, I think there was a bigger split between those two teams from a rating perspective. The Saints have looked really atrocious. The Seahawks have looked really, really good. So this is really a question of whether it's going to be an overreaction towards the Saints, towards the Seahawks playing much better than anticipated, or not. But I really think that 6 right now looks like a decent market buy price for the Seahawks.
There's been a lot of talk this week about Geno Smith and just how good his numbers looked against Detroit this past Sunday. I know that Seattle has had the benefit of taking on some weak opposition in recent weeks, trying the Falcons prior to that the Falcons prior to that Lions matchup. And Suma, with the numbers that Geno Smith is posting, how much stock do you put into some of these stats that might portray him as a top 5 quarterback in the league so far this season versus everything we had seen from Geno Smith his entire career prior to 2022?
Yeah, first of all, I don't think that he's a top 5 quarterback by any stretch of the imagination. But the more data we get, I would not rule out that this is a situation like Ryan Tannehill in 2019, where he's a seasoned veteran who has never been really bad, but has been playing in a, let's say, bad supporting cast or in bad offenses before. Geno Smith didn't really have any significant NFL action for a few years now. He just was the backup for Russell Wilson and played, I think, like 4 games or something last year. But he's in this league for 10 years, so we have information that teams value him as a backup. Otherwise, he would not be in the league anymore, and he would have retired like Blake Bortles today or something. And furthermore, I think it's entirely possible that the Seahawks have established a good functioning offensive system that can work when the circumstances are good. So we have seen the Seahawks offensive line getting completely dominated by the 49ers in week 2, and they didn't score a single offensive point. So I think there is the scenario, and I want to draw the comparison to Ryan Tannehill again, that Geno Smith is a, let's say, solid, decent quarterback who can execute a decent system. They're also using tons of play action, the same that Ryan Tannehill did under Arthur Smith. They have some playmakers like A.J. Brown and Corey Davis back then. So I think there is the potential that this is just a offense that is going to play well on a top 10 level if everything is right. And then the question is, will everything be right for them against a Saints defense that has not looked as sharp as last year?
Fitting to hear you make the Ryan Tannehill comparison, because the next game we can touch on involves Tannehill and his Tennessee Titans traveling to Washington. Interesting movement on the side in this one. It's been coming on and off the 3. Tennessee was 2.5, got bumped up to -3, currently back down to -2.5. And I've got to think that at 2.5, if anybody wants the Titans, this is where there's perhaps some value on their side. Or if somebody wants to tease the underdog, a 2.5-point dog crossing up through the 3 and 7 could possibly have some appeal for those who can stomach any exposure on Washington this week. But I would advise a word of caution against teasing Washington right now, because if this goes back up to +3, having a 3-point underdog in one game is better than teasing that underdog up by 6 points and needing a second leg to come through in a teaser as well. So something for bettors to consider, maybe pumping the brakes on any Washington teasers, as if we need to tell anybody to pump the brakes on backing the Commanders in their current form. Sumo, with this one, bouncing on and off the 2.5 and the 3 so far this week, where do you see this line settling out?
I think that the initial move at Circa going off the 3 towards 2.5, and the move that Chris had early, like touching the 3 a little bit and then immediately bouncing back to the 2.5, that tells me that for as bad as the Commanders looked in recent weeks, and they looked really, 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 really bad, bettors are still saying this cannot be a 3 at home against the Titans. The Titans will be without Traylon Burks. He has a turf toe. Kyle Phillips might be back. So we're looking at a receiving corps of probably Robert Woods, Kyle Phillips, and some action from Derrick Henry and the Titans in the passing game that might be completely enough for the Washington Commanders. But on the other side, I think what the market is basically saying that even if the Commanders have looked bad, they still have some potential to score here, and getting a field goal at home with the commies is our buy point. That's how I would interpret the early market movement.
Another game hovering right around the field goal, the Dolphins and the Jets. We've also seen this line on and off the 3 over the course of the week. The Dolphins were laying 3 earlier, bounced up to -3.5. Now kind of splitting the difference, settling in the range of Dolphins -3, -120. And this game featuring some newish quarterbacks for both teams, at least in the scope of this season. Teddy Bridgewater against Zach Wilson. And Sumo, what do you make instead of Tua versus Flacco like we would have seen to start the season, the shift to Bridgewater versus Wilson this Sunday and Dolphins Jets?
I think it is not a major downgrade going from Tua to Bridgewater when Mike McDaniel has 10 days to prepare for the Robert Saleh defense. I don't think this is as big of a downgrade, and I also think that the current market reflects that. I don't think we would be looking, or we would be staring at 4.5, 5.5-ish numbers if Tua was playing. I don't believe so. So I think Bridgewater probably was not warranting as much of a downgrade. There was a release earlier today on the Jets at plus 3.5. Then the market bounced like 10 or 15 cents towards the Jets, and then there was immediate buyback. And that tells me that also with the, let's say, position forming of a of early week Dolphins money, and then the immediate buyback today, I think there is strong support for the Dolphins in this one. And injury wise, we had Zach Wilson being limited today. He was not out at the early portion for the media. Robert Saleh said he was dealing with an ankle injury. That's something to monitor, but it didn't really sound like that's going to be important or that he could possibly be out this game. I think he's going to play. But every time a quarterback that relies on his legs and also trying to get out of the pocket when pressure or blitzes arrive, and that guy is dealing with some sort of an ankle injury, I think that's at least worth monitoring throughout the week. The Dolphins, we don't know whether Xavier Howard is going to play, but even if he is not, I just don't think that we will see major Jets money later this week. These early week movement tell me that there's a strong support for the Dolphins, and I think we need to get some catastrophic injury report for the Dolphins in order for the market to move entirely towards a flat 3 for the Jets again. The Jets, second game for Zach Wilson. Offensive line is not looking great, so really don't think what to make of that offense right now. And yeah, the Dolphins are clearly the superior team, and the market has been telling us so.
I don't think a viewer or listener needs to do too much reading between the lines to take away what to make of the side in this one based on that context. But Suma, macro level, aside from the handicap of this game, I would like to ask you about the value of going on or off of the 3 when people are looking to bet point spreads. In recent years, I've heard a lot of people I respect put it somewhere in the ballpark of 18 cents when we're talking about, getting on or off of that key number of 3. In the current scoring environment, I know this year has been kind of weird with totals. Has that done anything to shape the way that you look at games hovering right around, again, that key number of 3? What's it worth to get on or off of it?
Yeah, so when we are dealing with low totals, we are usually expecting more games to land around the 3 because we have less variance in the game versus a let's say high scoring game. So the 3 becomes a little bit more important when we are dealing with low totals and where we are really expecting scores in the, I don't know, 23-20 range and all those sorts of results. I don't have the numbers in front of me. 18 cents sounds like the wide range. You can also check the odds comparison tool at unabated.com. It's really, really useful. But also you can see when you go to some sports books and you do the drop-down menu, the sports books are basically telling you what they are charging for each half point of the 3. And for example, I saw it at betonline/lowbig today, and they were charging, I think, 25 cents on one game today. So I think it was the Colts Broncos game. So basically saying it's a low total, and coming off the 3, we are going to charge you from plus 105 to minus 120. That would be my take on that. Like I said, unabated.com is a very, very cool tool. And just using some drop-down menus at sportsbook, you can pretty much get a decent range of what these sportsbooks are charging as an average. And then you can reduce a few cents, and then you have the ballpark as to where the correct pricing should be.
Yeah, I want to underscore that point of reducing a few cents from the cost when a sportsbook is giving you that option on a drop-down menu, because of course, if they're charging 25 cents, it's not because it's worth 25 cents. It's probably because it's worth 20 cents or perhaps a touch less, kind of like that cash out option. A lot of bettors like to take it for security to lock in a profit. But generally, if a book is giving you an option to play your bet different than the standard odds or odds that you had previously locked in, they're giving you that option because there's a way to work the calculation in a way that tilts the scales in their favor. So just something to be mindful of as bettors are considering it. Usually, anywhere right around 20 cents is a nice round number. I wouldn't advise anybody paying the 25 cents in most scenarios to get on or off of that 3. Moving on to the late window on Sunday, a game that's not hovering around that key number of 3. The Cowboys and the Rams, we've seen some movement on the side and the total in this one so far this week. As far as the side goes, we saw the Rams open up laying 6. That got bet down as low as 4.5 before we saw some buyback on the Rams, bringing this number back up to 5 or 5.5. The total has been suppressed and hasn't seen a lot of buyback yet. 45.5 down to the range of 43. Suma, beyond the Rams' putrid offensive showing on Monday night in San Francisco, what else to you has driven the total off of the relatively key number of 6 and the total down 2.5 points?
So this game was open on Tuesday morning at a few sports books that had 45.5 and some 46s. And then really early on Tuesday morning, like I would say 8 a.m. on the East Coast time, there was a pretty big market move. Like everywhere, the under got crushed towards 44, and now we are looking at 43.5. And I would say that this is simply because this opening total was too high. And because it was a Monday night football game for the Rams, some books didn't have it open. And then we had to see this line moving on a Tuesday morning instead of a Monday morning. And when you consider that the Rams and the Niners closed around 42, and when we want to compare lines, spreads, or totals across different games, we always have to think, what was the information available at the time of kickoff, at the time of the closing number? And the Niners and the Rams closed 42, and going into that game, I think the market pretty much would have had the Niners as a great defense and a better offense than the Cowboys with Cooper Rush right now. The Cowboys also have a great defense, but their offense with Cooper Rush, so. So this game opening at 46 or 45 didn't really make a lot of sense from a market perspective. And the early market movers drastically told us that this had to be adjusted, and now we are looking at 43, which was probably the biggest move on the screen that I can remember this week.
Got it. Some good context on both the side and the total when the Cowboys take on the Rams in that late window on Sunday. And now let's hop into primetime Sunday Night Football. The Bengals at the Ravens. The side in this one, kind of a recurring theme of this show, another parallel to that Dolphins Jets game we talked about earlier, a spread going on and off of the 3. We've seen the Ravens anywhere from -3 to -3.5, currently settling in at about -3, -115 for the Ravens. And I'll get your take on this one, Suma. But first, Jacob, I want to toss it to you. You were at the Bengals Dolphins game last Thursday night. What were your thoughts on this year's Cincinnati team, having just seen them in person?
For Cincinnati, it's very clear to me that they want to establish some sort of run game, and it's even more clear to me that that's not really going to happen. They tried to run the ball a lot in that game against the Dolphins, and they did so very ineffectively. Lots of red zone plays where they just tried to punch it up the middle with Mixon, and it just didn't seem to really be working. With that being said, it's putting a big burden on Joe Burrow to throw the ball a lot. In that game specifically, the Bengals did put up 27 points. I felt like there were a few key throws that Joe Burrow missed on that he probably should have hit. But, can we put that a little bit on the amount he has to throw the ball? I think so. Can we put that a little bit on him having to be a bit better? That as well. But I think the biggest thing is the run game just isn't there, and it's not where they need it to be right now, trying to go back to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it feels like those two Super Bowl teams last year. It's crazy that those were the two conference champions, because I feel like Zach Taylor and Sean McVay have so much at their disposal, and especially McVay can scheme up really great play designs. And yet for the Bengals and the Rams, early down runs up the middle for 1 or 2 yards just seem to be the top play in the playbook. Yeah. I don't understand it, but here we are. Same story this year. Suma, what do you make of all that?
I have watched a video from JT O'Sullivan on the Bengals offense against the Dolphins, and it was basically a 1 hour video, and he analyzed every single play that the Bengals have run. And the interesting part is that Joe Mixon called the offensive line for an extra meeting this week to work on the efficiency of the run game because it's not been working. And then on the video, we saw that sometimes, so like every team uses some sort of motion, but what motion exactly is a completely different story. Like a few offenses are really smart with using motion, like they're trying to shift the front seven away from the run side and really trying to create some space, or they are using like a fly motion where the receiver is immediately attached inline and acts as an extra blocker that gives you an advantage in the run game, like the Packers do it very often. And then there are some teams that just do motion for the sake of doing motion, and that's what the Bengals are also doing. Like very often they use a motion, and then the receiver has to be like an extra blocker, but by doing that, they always draw another defender into the box, and they just turn a, let's say, 5-on-5 or 6-on-6 into a 7-on-7. And there was like one play where they did the same. They motioned their guy into block, I think, the defensive end or something, and that drew a safety into the box. And this safety that got drawn into the box made a tackle for a loss just because they drew that guy into the box. So really crazy stuff. And going back to that Sunday Night Football game, I think there's some respect for the Ravens in the market, even though the Bengals are coming off 10 days of rest. The Ravens have looked really good, and I think it's worth a discussion of how good the Bengals have looked when you break it down towards the competition that they have faced. And injury-wise, we have Rashad Bateman and Ronnie Stanley for the Ravens, who are, I think, two of the impact players. And the Bengals injury report is pretty clean. And we are still looking at a 3 that is juiced towards the Ravens. So it will be interesting to see where that ultimately goes. I think we will see like a bounce between 3 and 3.5. And then the injury report for the Ravens, especially Ronnie Stanley, who would be lined up against the Bengals' best pass rusher, and Trey Hendrickson would certainly play a role in dictating where the market will move.
That's the one and only Fabian Summer. Love that story about the Bengals motion, drawing a safety into the box to make a tackle for loss. We don't get that kind of insight often across the rest of the sports betting media landscape. So Suma, I want to make sure to let people know they can follow you on Twitter at Suma810. That's SUUMA810. You can also catch Suma's work on Primetime Sunday Night Football pregame and halftime live streams with Rob Pizzola, as well as a Monday article every week on the Hammer.bet, rehashing the week that was across the NFL. You can follow me on Twitter at MLandis18. That's MLANDES18. And you can catch Jacob and I right back here on Friday to break down our prop betting best bets for week 5 in the NFL. Everybody, thanks for tuning in on YouTube and in podcast form, and we'll catch you again on Friday.